Institute. The Sikh Research Institute's mission is to provide educational resources to Sikhs to lead a Guru-inspired life. As a global nonprofit organization, we produce original online courses, research papers, videos, podcasts, events, and books to create the largest go-to source of Sikh knowledge online. Please note that we will begin with a 45-minute presentation between the three presenters, followed by a Q&A session. So please drop your questions in the chat box and be sure to include your name and city. Now I will introduce you to our presenters. Jutman Kaur is a program coordinator at McGill University. She completed her bachelor's in kinesiology at Wayne State University. She has a passion for leading community work and projects, especially involving youth with organizations like Sikh Youth Alliance of North America. She co-produced the documentary Bengalwara, In Letter and Spirit. Next, we have Paul Singh. He has been actively involved with the Sikh community over the last 25 years. Ruben leads classes and facilitates workshops on Gurmat, history, and human rights at Khalsa schools, camps, retreats, and universities throughout the US. In addition, he serves as a guest teacher at local high schools on Sikh theology and practice. Ruben is regarded as a thought leader in the community thanks to his regular contributions to online Sikh publications and his own blog, spiritofsikh.com. Ruben is a technologist by training and runs a consulting practice for the nonprofit sector in the Washington, D.C. area. And lastly, we have Santbir Singh. Santbir Singh is an avid student of Sikhi. He has spoken at retreats, conferences, and youth camps for over 2 decades. Santbir has been trying to cultivate a deeper relationship with Shabad Guru while focusing on Sikh inspirations for social activism, feminism, and human rights through a critical analysis using different schools of thought and tradition. Born in Vancouver, he completed his bachelor's degree at McGill and currently lives in Toronto with his 2 wonderful children, amazing wife, and his crazy dog. Please welcome our presenters.
Sorry. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's a pleasure being here. Welcome to Ruben Pal Singh and Jutman Kaur. It's really wonderful that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. Today marks the culmination in many ways of the attack on the Darbar Sahib complex in 1984. Specifically today marks the Shahidi of Baba Jarnail Singh and his close associates like Bhai Amrik Singh. And so it's a really important day in Sikh history. And this time of year also, we of course commemorate Guru Arjan Sahib's Shahidi, the first Shahid in Sikh history. And so that's why we've gathered here today, that in this time where we remember our great Shahids from the past, to have a discussion about what Shahidi means to us, what it means for the Panth, and what it means for Sikhi as a faith.
Is your video on?
I will be asking questions of Ruben Paul and Jutman Kaur, and we will be discussing different aspects of Shahidi. But I wanted to begin.
Hold on 1 second. Your video is frozen. Do you want to check with Amanda? Check with Manvinder to get your video unfrozen.
Okay. Is my video frozen? Can you see me?
I can see you. Jutman Kaur, Ruben Pal Singh, you could confirm. Sorry about this, everyone.
The video is frozen. It's not Favorite's video.
Can you hear me though?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We can continue then, and hopefully the video will unfreeze on its own. Or perhaps maybe we should, let's see.
Not a problem. I'll just take a minute to figure this out. Sorry, everyone.
How's that? Is my video unfrozen now?
No.
It's still frozen.
The webinar in second.
Perhaps as we wait on Sant Birji, Ruben Ball or Jepman, if you're comfortable, would either of you like to introduce the webinar today? Ruben Ball, you're muted, sorry.
Thank you. Sure, I can do that. I think as Sant Singh was saying that this has been a week that we've been reflecting on Shahidi, and I know it's something that as families, as Sangat, we've been talking about, and I think maybe one way that we can start this off is just talking about Shahidi in general. And so, Jatmangor, if I may ask you. Just an initial thought about Shahidi. So if you could share with me your thoughts, like why is Shahidi important in Sikhi in the first place? Why is it that we would spend time talking about this and reflecting on this each year or more frequently? So from your opinion, why is Shahidi important to discuss?
I think Shahidi is important in Sikhi because a Gursikh's whole life and existence is Shahadat. Like the first step, Pehla Maran Kabul, that's the first qualification on this path to give our head. Jauto prem khilan ka chao, sir tar tari gari meriao, itmarik pair tari jai, sir di jai, kaan na ki jai. And when we receive Khande ki Paul, giving our head to the Guru is that first step. And it was the same requirement for Bhai Lerna, Baba Amardas, Bhai Jetha, and so on, until and including the Panch Pyare. This like giving up of ourselves is at core what Shahadat is really about. So I think understanding that presence of Shahadat in Sikhi right from the beginning, and that it is driving the existence of a Sikh's life is really important, because giving our head is giving up that manmat and promising to live by Gurmat. And this is the foundation for the physical Shahadat that Gursikh may be blessed with. And I think it's unique in Sikhi because once we make this submission to Guru Sahib, we use our mind, body, and spirit to serve the Guru and to carry this mission of Sarbat da Bala forward. And I know we often hear Sarbat da Bala as an ardas, but it's not just an ardas, it's something we do have to practice. Sarbat is the essence of all creation, beyond even humanity alone. It's Sarbat. I think there's a reason why Sarbat is the word that was used and not just Sari Srishti or Sari Manukta. It's everything that is Vaiguru's creation and Akal Purkh di Raza. So I think that mission, the Guru's mission that we've submitted to, is like our resolve in life is to uphold Akal Purkh's Raza and Sata, like the will of Akal Purkh and the rule of Akal Purkh, and that's why the Khalsa was created. So I'm gonna like throughout like our time here reference a lot to Bhai Fauja Singh's poem Gurbani. So even if like those attending the webinar want to pull that up, you can look up Bhai Fauja Singh Gurbani poem online if you'd like to follow along. But that poem starts off with two lines that I think really describe what Shahidi is in Sikhi. And I'll read that right now. Teri amar Sikhi nu Sadguru, man bach kram de naal nibha deange, tan tam jawani jaidad sab kuch lekhe panth de assi laga deange. So I think understanding that the Guru Sikhi to practice that in this world in mind, body, and spirit, word, thought, and deed, in all aspects of our lives, is the beginning of that Shahadat, is that step we're taking. And devoting everything to the Panth, everything we have built in this world, while being involved in worldly matters to a degree, dedicating that all for the cause of the Panth is important for a Sikh's life. So that those are just like some of my thoughts to kind of start us off.
Okay, thank you very much. That was beautiful. I love that idea. Thank you, Ruben Ball, by the way, for jumping in there. I love that idea of the fact that the goal for all of us is to be a shaheed in a sense, a spiritual, a mental, a shahidi of our mind by giving ourselves to the Guru. That Bella Marn Kabul Jivan Ki Chadas. Ruben Palverji, what are your thoughts on shahidi, and maybe if you could go into also some of the background on what the word even means itself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. And I guess kind of starting off with Shahidi and sort of what it's meant to me. And to be honest, it kind of changes as I go along in life. With everything that's been going on over the last few months, I've been reflecting a lot on hukum. And so, both with the current state as well as just getting older, my views on hukum changes a lot as we go along. And so as I started thinking about Shahidi this week, I started thinking about it within the framework or within the lens of hukum. And I would say that Shahidi represents the ultimate acceptance of hukum. Recognizing that my body, my life, my attachments, that these are all temporary. The simran that I do, the vichar that I do, the rahat that I live by, that these are not just for me to achieve or acquire anything material, but ultimately it is for that moment to bear witness. And in Bani, as I reflect on it, there is Shabad after Shabad that describes the type of Gurmukh that Guru Sahib is telling me to be. And to me, the Shahid is where I see those living examples of what Guru Sahib is describing. It is, to put it differently, it is Bani in action. And for me personally, what it represents, I think, when I was younger, there was this publication called the World Sikh News. Some of you may remember. I believe it was published in California. I'm not really sure. But in the late 80s, early 90s, it would provide news and images of what was going on in the movement in Punjab that particular week. And inevitably, every week there would be images of Singhs and Kaurs who had become Shahid that week. And at 10 years old, 11 years old, I would stare at these pictures for hours and really reflect on it. At an age where I was maybe having my own struggles and contemplating my own Sikhi, these images made me question, what was it? What was it about this path that so many young people were willing to give their lives? What was it? I would cut these images out and of the paper and put them on my wall, because it was something that really resonated with me. For me and my friends, we were all drawn into Sikhi in different ways. Some it was through Kirtan, some it was through Gatka, others it was through Seva. But for me, it was the lives and the stories of our Shahids. They were, the heroes on my wall as a kid. They were, as I said, the Bani in action. And even today, whether it's the story of the Sahibzade or Guru Arjan Shahidi or the countless Shahids of the 80s and 90s, those stories still inspire me. I will say that to your other question about the definition, I believe that there is a Sikh cultural way that we understand Shahidi. But I would say that, just with my own research and my own interpretation, we generally say that a Shahid is someone who has given their life for the Panth. That is sort of the Sikh way of looking at it. And I do believe that is true. But I also kind of believe that there is this element of it, Shahid coming from this Arabic word meaning witness. It doesn't necessarily need to be somebody who has passed away. It could be that person who has been a witness to truth in their lifetime. I have some more thoughts on that I might share, as we go through the discussion. But that's sort of my view on Shahidi and what it's meant to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that idea of a Shahid following Hukam. It resonates so powerfully, especially when we look at Guru Arjan Sahib's own Shahidi, where in the midst of his Shahidi, he's saying, Tera kiya meetha lage, har naam padarat nanak mange. That this is sweet to me. Guru Sahib is so in love with Guru Sahib's Hukam that even the act of being Shahid is a gift. And of course, that level of being able to reach the level, that's something that Guru Sahib reaches. But we see in our history a lot of Sikhs getting close or getting to that level. And that's a really amazing thing about Guru Sahib's Kirpa. Jabman Kaur, we're speaking a lot about 1984. If you've been on social media over the last week, it's been on everyone's feeds, different posts about 1984. As someone who was born after 1984, how do you find relevance to what happened in 1984? You know, for myself, for Ruben Ball, we have memories of the event, even if they're childhood memories. And we saw the impact it had on our parents and on the community around us. But you weren't there to witness that. And moreover, how do we honor those Sikhs who died for the Panth 30 years ago? What did they die for? Like, in the end, how can we integrate their sacrifices into our lives?
I think a huge part of my connection to that time period, or even long before, so much of Sikh history happened before all of our lifetimes, is that initial connection to Sikhi and Bani and Gurmat that was formed in like my childhood. I think history for me was always presented as the living examples of Sikhs following the Guru's words and, you know, laying their lives down to carry forward that principle and that purpose in their life. So like 1984 is something my parents saw. They were both studying in university. My dad was studying in university in Amritsar and my mom was in Ludhiana. They vividly remember the curfew as well. And both of them witnessed a lot of what was happening at that time. And I grew up listening to those stories. And I think that is a huge part of how we can connect future generations as well. This storytelling tradition that we have is very important. It's very important to make sure we continue sharing stories. And it's important that we don't share them that narrative that's perpetuated that could draw us away from Gurmat, to not pay attention to any narratives that the state wants us to think of our own history, that other people distracting us from the Nyara Pan of the Khalsa Panth want us to think about our history. We should make sure that our inspiration is Gurmat, that love for Bani that we are trying to cultivate. We're doing ardas to Maharaj, that we have that love for Sikhi and that jah to give our life for Sikhi, that is what is inspiring us in those Shahids. So I think that to really pay our respect and commemorate them and celebrate them, it can't just be surface level. It has to be something that we practice. If their lives inspire us, we need to understand what about their lives made them so inspirational. And if we look at it in every Shaheed, in all of history, it is Bani, it's Gurmat, it's their love for Sikhi, their love for Guru Sahib, and that's what made their lives so beautiful and so unique. And when I was mentioning earlier, a part of that poem by Fauja saying, Sikh Panth de assi laga deange, the word sacrifice, I know that's the closest we can use to Gurbani and Shahidi, but it doesn't do justice to what it actually is. Sacrifice insinuates that we have something to give up. When we've already accepted that our head is the Guru's, we belong to the Guru, it really is that raza, that thing that Ruben Paul Virji was talking about, that understanding of Parna, and that is us living in Parna. That's at least those Sikhs were living in that Parna, understanding by Guru's raza that their purpose and resolve in this life was to just carry forward that mission, that purpose. So I think just that love for Sikhi is, for me, what connects me back to Sikh history, two different examples from Sikh history.
That's beautiful. Thank you. You had mentioned by Fauja Singh earlier, and one of my favorite quotes from that poem that by Fauja Singh wrote, which he wrote before his Shahidi, and he foresaw the role that he would play in the Panth. Bujh rahi jot jo asar nu jaapdi hai, khoon apne naal jaga denge. That the light of faith that's dwindling we will rekindle it with our blood, that we will wake up the Panth with our blood, with our Shahidi. Ruben Palvirji, what role has Shahidi played in nation making in Sikh history, in creating the Panth as a sovereign entity?
I think it's played a tremendous role in nation making. If we look throughout our history and the number of kalugare that we've been through, how many times have we been on the verge of extinction? And these are times when we talk about it at camps and retreats, we talk about the resilience of the Khalsa Panth, And the question I often reflect on is, where did that resilience come from? And I 100% agree with what Jabman Kaur said, that it comes from our Barni. It comes from our Barni, and it comes from our Shahids, who were examples of that Barni. To your question, there's the saying, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And having had the opportunity to, in the experiences I've had over the last many years working with Sikhs and working with Sikh youth, I do strongly feel that the blood of our Shahids are the foundation in which our nation is built upon. Even in my most cynical of times, when I think of the state of the Panth, I see glimpses of it. I see glimpses of that spirit, of that nationhood at camps, at retreats, or even initiatives that young Sikhs are taking up today, these months. Not only does the blood of our Shahids allow us to grow as a nation, but it also connects us, and I think that's important for us to grow as a nation. I can get into heated debates on Panthic issues with so many other things in Kaurs, but every single one of us will be moved to tears on the Sakhi of the Chote Sahibzade, or the women of Mir Manu's prison. So I believe that the blood of our Shahids, as I like to think, they flow through our veins. They connect us and help us grow and fortify the Sikh nation.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to do a follow-up question with you that's related, that idea of growing in the Sikh nation. Like you, I'm the father of 2 young children. And, we, especially parents these days, we really micromanage what our kids consume, what they watch, what they read. I mean, my parents had no idea what we were watching half the time. We were watching movies that were totally inappropriate for our age. And nowadays our kids are, really down to every episode, we make sure that it's okay for them. And I've seen this trend among young Sikh parents in the diaspora of being uncomfortable with aspects of Sikh history, with not wanting to go into the details. There are some really difficult details, the ones that we mention in Ardas, for example, every day, the details of how people were Shaheed. What are your thoughts on that as a parent of 2 young children?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. I think it's a very pertinent question. First of all, let me say I am one of those parents who micromanages the content of our children, that what they're exposed to, and because I think surely there are things that they're going to watch and figure out on their own, but for other things, at least at this age, we as parents want to be aware of what narrative that they're hearing or seeing. So, at home, we tend not to watch a lot of violent movies or shows or anything like that. However, when it comes to our history, we don't hold anything back. And I don't know, maybe that's just the way my wife and I, we were raised. But that's how it is. When you ask this question, it reminds me of a time not too long ago where we had a church group visit our Gurdwara. And, I was helping them with a tour and showing them around the Gurdwara. And, we went to the Langar Hall and I was explaining what goes on here. And I noticed that they were very distracted. And I couldn't figure out what it was until I realized at one point none of them were listening to me. And then it dawned on me, it was the pictures of the 18th century Shahids in the Langar Hall. So I started looking at it from their eyes, from their perspective, that here they're watching these 5- and 6-year-olds eating their food under a picture of a man whose scalp is getting ripped off his head, or a person being boiled alive, or someone getting sawed in half. And if you look at it from their perspective, that's crazy, right? That's disturbing. In fact, I'm waiting for the day that Gurdwara start taking down those photos because of how troublesome it is. But here's the thing, you know, I mean, that's our history, right? That's who we are. That's why we're here. In our home, in particular, for us here, we want those images etched in the heads of our children so that they know exactly where they come from and what kind of life they have to live. You know, I want them to know those images so well that they realize, well, you know what, I'm not like the other kids. You know, I don't have the luxury to turn my head away when I see an injustice. I've walked into homes of Gursikhs where, as you walk in their house through the door, standing in the foyer, you will see a 6-foot painting of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old being bricked alive. That's who we are.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, you know, once said to me, you know, when we bought our new house, you know, and the walls were empty, they said, you know, don't make these walls a shrine to yourselves. Pay homage to the people that you want to be like. And we've tried to do that. So at least for our home, there's not a hallway that you can walk through without seeing some images of our Shahids, both historical and contemporary. But as strongly as I feel about this, I will say this, that as an educator in this space with Sikh youth, I do believe that we, as the next generation of storytellers, as Japman Kaur was alluding to, that we do need to be creative in the stories that we tell. We are the caretakers of this narrative, and you know, both in how we tell the stories and the methods in which we tell them. I do fear that the ways that maybe the three of us were told the stories of our Shahids, I fear that may not resonate with young people today, who have very different paradigms of learning and consuming information. So I do think we need to be more creative in how we craft the narrative. You know, for example, in our home, we don't talk about Operation Blue Star. We talk about the Battle of Amritsar and how the handful of Sikhs held the might of the Indian Army for several days. When we talk about the events of 1984, we make sure that we talk about how it inspired a generation of Sikhs who started keeping their kesh, who took Amrit during this time period, who started following the path of Sikhi in those days in the 80s. So we tend to take it from the approach of inspiration. And so that's where I think we need to get creative. And of course, the methods in which we share it, through music, through art, through film, through poetry, turn it into bedtime lullabies, whatever it is. I feel that if we continue to tell the stories the same way, we're only going to preach to the converted. And if we're unwilling to get creative with these stories, I fear that they one day may be lost.
Okay, very good.
Sanpirji,
Hanji.
is it okay if I add something to that?
Yes, please do.
I was just going to say that, you know, as Ruben Balriji was speaking, one of the poems that he wrote on his blog came to mind. It's called Bricks. And I think everything he just shared sums it up, is summed up really well in that poem. You know, he goes through a bunch of examples and keeps reinforcing that history can't be told and it must be felt, and our Bani can't just be sung, it must be felt. And you know, that poem wraps up with him speaking about raising his children, saying, I want them to know that a 7 and 9-year-old didn't give their lives so we can reminisce and cry. They gave their lives so we can hold our heads high. So when the Vizier Khans of the world put us to the test, we stand up brave and fierce and let Vaheguru handle the rest. And I don't think, unless we're honest about our narratives, we tell them as they happened, that our next generations will be able to feel them at all. We need to make sure that that story, like Birji just said, is told according to our values, according to Gurmat. And if we don't believe that physical death is the end, and we don't believe that that physical death is what defines you know, our lives, and is something that our lives revolve around. It's the death of our egos. And so I think I just wanted to share that that was really beautifully summed up by a poem Birji had written a while back.
Yeah, I would recommend everyone who's on our webinar right now to check out Virji's blog. He's got some beautiful writing on there. I've often thought that Baba Joravar Singh and Baba Fateh Singh, when those bricks were crushing their chest, that they weren't just taking the weight of the bricks, they were carrying the weight of the Panth. and that everything we have is due to them. And I think that's why their story is so powerful in the Panth, is because we all know that if they had broken that day, that we wouldn't be here. And it was their strength that brought us through as a community, as a nation. And that idea of telling stories in a way that makes sense to your audience, I think that's something that we are starting to do, but we have missed out on. And I like that point. Every generation of Sikhs has to engage with Sikh history in their own way. And we see that in the Singh Sabha Lair, for example, they started to write Sakhis in their way, in a way that made sense to the people who were following them, who were reading them in the newspapers and in the tracts of the time. And we need to create new ways of engaging with the youth that we can relay our history in a genuine and authentic way, but in a way that is appealing to them as well. You know, since the early 90s, there hasn't been really an outright physical attack on the Sikh Panth. Sikhs are being targeted in Punjab still for political activity, but the sort of wide-scale torture, arrest, and elimination of Sikhs isn't happening. And it's not happening in the diaspora either. And it's really easy to find stories of great Shahids during times of outright oppression. And we see that from the time of when the Mughals or the Afghanis or the British were trying to stamp out Sikhi. We have these amazing stories. Nowadays, we aren't facing an enemy that we can fight on the battlefield a lot of times. Who or what should we look up to as a community, Ruben Palvirji? Who should we be looking up to?
You're right. That these enemies that we are facing in modern times, they're harder to see. They're more subtle, but they can be just as dangerous. But I think really kind of going back to what Japman Kaur said earlier, which I think is quite beautiful, is there is this common link that connects our Shahids over the course of hundreds of years, and that common link that link that is common amongst all of them is that love and commitment to Guru Granth Sahib Maharaj. And in fact, to me, my most favorite image, of Baba Jarnail Singh, of the many images, are the ones where he's at the tabia, or where he is at the foot of the Guru. So to me, that inspiration over those course of 100 years, those are forever. And if I really use that same source of inspiration that inspired them, that Barney, then we can take on that is forever. We can take on any enemy across any time period, regardless of what weapon is coming at us. So to me, I think that life experience is forever. But to your question, that if we as a community need some of these modern day examples to sort of lead us that direction, then that's where I say let's relook at what it means to be a Shaheed. And if I go back to that definition earlier of it really being that person, that individual who has let go of all those worldly attachments to the point that their vichar, their simran, their lifestyle has brought them to this point where they can respond to that moment of truth, then it can be anyone. It can be anyone who lives that life. And I believe that they're around us. So I can't name names for you, but I believe that they're around us. They may not be the ones speaking at the podiums at the Gurdwara. They may not be the one wearing the typical bana that you might expect. But I've seen a lot of courage. I've seen a lot of bravery amongst the Singhs and Gaurs around us today. And I think we don't have to go as far as that to find that inspiration.
Thank you. Japman Kaur, do you have thoughts about that? Are there people that you look up to today as an example of someone who may not be a Shaheed in the traditional sense, but has given their life to the Guru? And if not, maybe you could share a story with us about a Shaheed that has meant something to you in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that when we're looking for inspiration, it's important to make sure that we know what we're seeking out of that inspiration. When we are inspired by Gursikhs from the past, our attachment isn't to the person themselves as much as it is their jivan. And it's that jivan that inspires us to improve our jivan. Again, going back to Bhai Fauja Singh's poem, he says, Teri bani nu hride nivas deke avgan apne sare gwa deange. And then later on, he, near the end of the poem, says that Meher teri naal khalsa bolda hai, awaz andarli bahar suna deange. So that Sikhi that Gursikhs cultivate on the inside, it's important to make sure that that is coming on the outside. I think when we look at the battle against Hama and ego, it is on the inside, but then our role becomes to fight that battle on the outside when we see Hama causing destruction in the world. And I was listening to Asa Kivar this morning, and the beautiful Shabad sang, Soi Sant je pave Ram, Sant Gobind ka ek ka kam. There's really one resolve that a Gursikh has. And when I think of a Shahid that inspires me, that, just showed that Bani was the most important thing. And the one thing that kept them grounded was Bhai Anokh Singh Babbar. His Shahidi was August 30th, 1987. And Baisa was known to do ardas, that he be granted the gift to be Shahid. And that, no cries come from him when he is in that moment. And when he was arrested by the police, he was tortured for days. He had hot metal rods foot long that were hammered into his legs from the heels upward. These hot metal rods were passed through his chest. But he took the tortures calmly, and his ardas was heard. Witnesses to his torture, and then Shahidi say that he was uttering Vaheguru the whole time he was in Simran, and he kept doing ardas that his case and Sikhi would remain intact. And when Baisa was inmate, where physically his body was brutally just tortured, and he was laying on the ground, unable to move, and he opened his eyelids because his eyes were also taken out, and there was one eye that was hollow, one eye that was dangling, and he opened his eyes. And this exact state is described by Dilbag Singh Nagonke's dad, who was in the same jail. And it said that Baisa then called out to the guard outside his cell, asking what time it was. And, the guard, also curious about this request, answered, it's past 7 p.m. And all Baisa responded was that it's time for Sodat. It's time to do Redas. So I think that in that moment, that love for the Guru, that commitment to the Guru, that is what was most important to Baisa. Not the physical state, not things that we glorify in bravery in a Shahid. It's important to make sure that we also highlight that moral bravery, that how unique that character of a Gursikh was, that at that point, all that was important to Baisa was that commitment to the Guru. So I think that's what really inspires me when I hear about Sakhiyas of Shahids throughout history, that it's always been about that commitment to the Guru, that the humility that we see in Shahids, it's that their constant ardas was to remain steadfast on this path. So what else could our ardas be than that same ardas? So Baisa's story, especially considering the time that we're talking about, is something that always comes to mind. And I think, and again, that same ardas is repeated in Bhai Fauja Singh's poem as well. Jab aapki aud nidan bansi sees tera hai tenu chada deange. That this, our head is the Guru's, and only chadona, and that's such a unique word, chadona. It just highlights the fact that it wasn't ours to begin with. And again, going back to that shabad that I heard this morning, that Sant Gobind ka ek ka kam, that there is that only one resolve is to carry forward that mission of the Guru, and that can only be developed if we develop an honest relationship with Bani. And Bhai Anokh Singh Babbar's request at that moment and that commitment to do the reras is something we take into it sometimes. It's our mechanical day-to-day nithanim, but being able to see the beauty in that moment, I think, is very important, and that's what we should draw inspiration from. When we see that in our communities now, like you're asking in contemporary Sikhs now, wherever we see the Guru's work being done, wherever we feel more drawn towards the Guru, that should be our Sangat. And those are the people we should find inspirational. And that is the benchmark for us. The benchmark is the Guru and Gurmat. There's nothing more that we're seeking, because everything else in this world is temporary and imperfect. Only Satguru is perfect.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing the story of Bayanok Singh Babbar. I remember one of the Shahids that really spoke to me as a child was by Satidas being sawn in half, and the idea that Bani, that Japji Sahib would emanate from him even after he was split into two, that it was so much a part of himself. And I used to think, is it possible for Sikhs to be that much in love with Bani today? And stories like Bayanok Singh show that the spirit of Sikhi, of being connected to Bani, is something that even within my lifetime existed and does exist, and that there are Gursikhs like that. May 25th, a little under 2 weeks ago, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis by the police. It would be, I think it would be a little bit of a disgrace, to be honest, if we didn't take this opportunity, this platform that we have, to address what's happening in North America right now, and to the issue of Black Lives Matter and the discrimination, historical and contemporary, that Black Americans and Canadians have felt and continue to feel and continue to suffer under. I've seen a lot of Sikhs try to sort of bring the spirit of Sikhi into this, and sometimes it can be a little bit awkward. I was wondering, Ruben Balverdi, someone who works with so many NGOs and is involved in activist causes, how can we bring that spirit of Shahidi, that spirit of activism, that spirit of standing up for the truth? How can we do that and be good allies instead of just being patronizing or making false comparisons that are in fact inconsiderate many times? Like, we can't say that we suffered the same way that African Americans did, because of course we didn't as a community. We suffered in other unique ways. So how do we build those bridges, and what should we be doing, do you feel, as a community?
Yeah, no, and thanks for raising this. First and foremost, I think it's having these dialogues. Because it is a little tricky, you know, and Sikhs as a whole have different views on this, and I think step one is we should be having these dialogues about where we as Sikhs fit in this process. With me, you know, our history has been very clear about where we stand when issues, in particular this issue with George Floyd's death and racial injustice in this country and Black Lives Matter. We historically have always stood for the most vulnerable, and not just in our words, but in our actions and in our institutions. So I think we as a community are kind of at an inflection point right now. As Sikh institutions, and I've had the opportunity to participate with many of them over the years, you know, historically, some have been more vocal towards these issues than others. We've made statements, we've put out emails, but I think and I hope that with everything that we've seen just this week alone, that our institutions and our leadership have realized that that Sikh issues are not separate from the issues of the oppressed or the disenfranchised. And with that understanding, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is our work after all these protests end? We will participate in the protests, and Sikh institutions have been supportive, and all that is amazing. But what happens after these protests end? what role are we as Sikh institutions and individuals going to play to rethink the systems, the frameworks that are in place that are allowing these injustices to happen in the first place? And that's just as relevant for the institutions as it is for individually, for me. Now, all of us have different constraints, resources, privilege, but there is one privilege that every one of us has that for those of us who identify ourselves as Sikhs, and that is the privilege of being in the school and educated in the school of Guru Nanak. And I hope that privilege brings us a sense of clarity of where we fit in this fight. And with that privilege also comes the responsibility that we can't stay silent. So I think everything that we've discussed today up to this point very much is intertwined with what we're seeing over these last few weeks and months.
Thank you. I wish we could talk about that more. Maybe we'll have time. We'll see how it goes with the questions, but we need to move into some of the questions. And let's try to keep our answers a little succinct so we can get through as many of the questions as possible. I'm going to direct the first one to you, Japman Kaur. Here's a question. There's a lot of confusion among youth here in Punjab, especially urban Sikh kids who were taught and raised in a system which either doesn't talk about Shahids, or if they do talk about Shahids, speak about it through the government narrative. There's a stigma among young people here. They don't talk about Shahidi. How can we change this? So I know that's a big question, and I don't expect you to have the answer, but what are your thoughts on a question like that?
I do think we kind of addressed it earlier in this webinar. Sikhs have never backed down from speaking the truth. You know, in Bani it says, Nanak Raj Chalaya, Sach Kotistani Neevde. And this whole foundation is built on the truth. So again, like going back to that point that until we don't understand what our purpose was, why we were created, we'll always feel this dubida because it's natural to feel it. Like everything that's working against us or working against this like truth and this ultimate like divinity that's within all of us that Guru Sahib wanted to recognize, it will be there to distract us and waver us. And we need to make sure that we're fighting back just as strong. And that comes with fearlessly telling our narratives and encouraging each other to do so. And when we do hear narratives incorrectly, making sure that we're correcting them within the community and calling them out. If we see something that's anti-Gurmat and against the Guru's way, we hear things about our Shahids and our history that isn't the Guru's way, don't let it stay there like that. We need to be able to counter that. And again, the only way to do that is to practice Sikhi ourselves and to educate ourselves. And I can really just speak on my own behalf. I lack in this education of Sikh history a lot. Sometimes my brother, who's like a history fanatic, or Santi Virji, I get to like talk with you sometimes. Like, I know that when I hear people who do reflect on Sikh history a lot and read about it, you're able to tell your narrative with a lot more understanding and conviction if you've read it yourself and you take the time to do that. So to the person who did ask this question, like if this question's in your mind, that means that jaw is already there. So then like walk that path, and while you're walking it, look back on your history and make sure you're well equipped. So when these things are happening that do cause distraction, you're able to counter it. Don't know if I answered the question exactly, and I know I took it too long, so I apologize for that.
No apologizing. I like that idea, starting small. And I think we sometimes get afraid of starting small. We expect big results right away. But the definition of a grassroots movement is that it starts small and it builds from there. And I think we are lucky now. When I was younger, we didn't have access to a lot of information about contemporary Shahids, for example. There have been newspapers or people doing gatha or tadiwara, but there wasn't access in the sense like you can go online and find bios of almost every prominent Shahid from post 84. So there's a lot of information out there now. That means also there's a lot of contrary information as well. You have to use your mat to be able to filter through them. The next question, I'm going to be addressing it to Ruben Virji. So taking into consideration the case of Jinda Shahid by Takat Singh, and for those of you who don't know, Bhai Takat Singh was an early 20th century Sikh who, along with his wife Bibi Harnam Kaur, really advocated for women's education in a huge way. And his activism for education in the Panth was so much so that he was given the title of Jinda Shahid by the Panth at that time as a title. And we use that title nowadays as well sometimes for someone like Jathedar Ranjit Singh, for example, who gave justice to the Nirankaris. So the person goes on to say, does there need to be more research or revision on the idea of what Shahidi is in the modern day, or beyond presenting it as just dying? So I think we've touched on this before, but if you had anything else to share, Ruben Virji.
Yeah, I do think that we do need to revisit it, and that is not to discredit or discount so many of the Shahids who gave their lives, but it is to broaden our scope of what a Shahid is. I sometimes feel like, and to know that these are living examples, as we said earlier, that living examples of Bani in action. Speaking of contemporary Shahids, the one that I reflect on a lot recently is by Jaswant Singh Kalra. And when I look at his story, and I won't go into all of it, I'll assume most of you know, but his research, he was a human rights activist and researched the illegal cremations in Punjab of Sikhs who were being killed in custody. But to me, if I look at his life and his Shahidi, his Shahidi did not happen, in my opinion, in September of 95. It happened that day that he had his press conference and he announced to the world the injustices of the state. It happened that day when he was holding accountable all the perpetrators of the violence, and he knew exactly what the consequences were going to be. To me, that was the day he became a Shahid. He knew exactly what the outcomes would be as well, but he knew that more than that, justice is what mattered. And so I do think that we need to revisit this idea of Shahid, because I think it will also broaden our minds, broaden the examples that we have of Shahids, and recognize that there could be different roles that one plays in being able to reach that state.
Thank you for sharing that story, especially about by Jaswant Singh Kalra. I had the pleasure of meeting his children once, and I was asking questions about their father, and they shared something with me that after Beant was assassinated, the chief minister of Punjab, Jaswant Singh knew that they would use it as an excuse to pick him up and kill him, and so he was ready for that. And he was so ready for it that he, in fact, would sleep in the living room. Because if the police came at night, he didn't want them to disturb his children and his wife. So that type of foresight, that type of acceptance of Bana is just awe-inspiring. And we see that with Bhai Fauja Singh telling his wife many years before he got Shahid that she needs to imagine that she is seeing his dead body, and to prepare herself for that, because that's going to be an inevitability. One more example that comes to mind is by Beant Singh, who after receiving Amrit, told his wife, the great Sikh activist Bibi Bimal Kaur, he told her that she needed to get used to the idea of him not being there. He was trying to prepare her for the inevitability of what would happen, because he had already given his head to the Guru. He had taken that step, and it was just a matter of now following through on it. I think that's something you'll see in the stories of a lot of Shahids, this idea of really walking into their own destiny as sovereigns, as sovereign individuals, walking in as royals of the Guru, of Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. There's a question here. Could you explain more about contemporary Shahids? I feel like we've given a lot of examples already of contemporary Shahids, like by Jaswant Singh Khala and by Anok Singh Babbar. If the person who's asking this has maybe a more specific question they can follow up with, we can get to it, but I don't think we can start listing off all of the contemporary Shahids, because over the last 35, 40 years, there have been, unfortunately, many instances of government oppression of Sikhs, which has led to many brave Sikh women and men giving their lives for the Panth. Here's a question from someone who I think is new to Sikhi. And he says, for those of us who weren't raised in the Sikh tradition, but were led to the Guru later in life, how can we build the same connection with Shahids that Sikhs have? How can we develop that connection? Japman Kaur, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think early, the first question you posed to me about how I developed that relationship, even especially because 84 happened years before I was born. I think it is to connect to what made those Shahids ready for Shahidi. And if you're new to Sikhi, there's something that drew you into Sikhi. And usually that is this revolutionary love that's like no other. And it's that same love that, Guru, and that led to Guru Arjan Sahib's Shahidi. It was what Guru Nanak laid down for us. That foundation is like nothing else, because it's to take a human being from Manas the Devta. It's to challenge every idea out there that tries to oppress people's mental state. So I think that when we're looking for a connection, we should try to understand what it is that inspired us into Sikhi, and that is usually the same inspiration that others had when walking this path. It's something that draws all of us in so beautifully and so strongly, and it's like nothing else. This love is like nothing else in the world.
Thank you.
May I comment on that also? Or?
Yes, please take your time. We actually, if I could reach out to people, please do ask more questions. We do have the time for them. So go ahead and ask questions. Please do go ahead, give your thoughts.
No, thank you. And 100% agree with what Japman Kaur said. Just as you're saying, or the question is, how can I have that same connection if I didn't sort of grow up with this tradition? I will say that there are many people who've grown up in this tradition who don't have that connection. So it goes both ways. So I believe it is a connection that can be created. I will say for me, my connection with the Shahids is directly proportionate to where I'm at in my relationship with my Guru. Because, as we've talked about times throughout this discussion, the correlation between the two of Shahid and Barney, and even the Sakhi of the story of by Anok Singh Babbar's life and Shahidi that Japman Kaur described earlier. There were times when I remember reading that and I wouldn't be affected by it. I was reading it more academically, but then there's times where I have felt more connected, where his Shahidi just brings me to tears. So I guess I'm saying this to say that I think as we spend more time with Barney, which is for everyone, that connection, I believe that connection with Shahidi comes with it.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah.
And if I can just add something quickly to that. The Shabad I was sharing earlier, Sant Gobind Kai at the end of that Shabad, Guru Sahib, Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj says, Nanak ko upji pratit man mukhar gurmukh sadjit. So that loss of Manmat, the Manmukh losing, like that is the resolve of a Khalsa. And when we recognize that in our Shaheeds and in our history, and that gives us inspiration. I think when a Khalsa is walking on this path, when we hear the statement "dying for the Panth," sometimes I think we understand it as like we died for this Panth, like the people in this Panth alone. But it's actually Panth as in the path Guru Sahib laid out for us. Like we've given our life to that. And that battle, we don't actually have enemies. Like what makes Shahidi and Sikhi unique is we aren't giving our life for any benefit or any gain at the end other than just Sarvata Pala. And that battle is against Homme, like Homme Nave Nal Virodh hai. Jera si naam simran aap kar rahe hain, Ohi, like to share that with the world is to battle Homme, to battle the Manmat that other people have. So throughout our history, we'll see that it was never a battle of Sikhs versus someone else. It was always Sikhs versus whatever disruptions were happening because of ego. And that is the path of Sikhi that's so unique. And the qualities that we hear in Mool Mantar, Nirpa, Nirvair, Kahu ko te itna nah pe manat an. We don't strike fear. We don't see an enemy in anyone. It's always a battle against ego. And that's why Guru Gobind Singh Ji, as he wrote the Zafarnama, wanted to meet Aurangzeb, befriended Aurangzeb's son, because it was never about creating an enemy or seeing someone as an enemy. So again, that love is what drives a Sikh on this path, and that love is what should inspire us on this path.
Thank you for bringing up that point. I was going to ask earlier, but I didn't think we had the time for it. You know, Shahidi is also very important in Islam and in the Christian tradition. You know, Catholics will have pictures of their martyrs quite a lot as well, just like we put up pictures of our Shaheeds. And Shahidi in Islam is very important. And your point really captured what the difference is in our philosophies. Whereas in many ways, Shahidi in Islam or in Christianity is like a ticket to heaven, that regardless of what you've done in your life beforehand, if you at the end of your life do something for the faith, then you'll be given you know, this free ride into heaven. Whereas Sikhi, that idea, what you brought up earlier about Baifoja Singh saying Charana, like giving his head to the Guru as a gift, that it's very different. They give Shahidi before they're actually physically Shaheed, and it's an act of love, not an act of wanting to achieve something or get something. So thank you for sharing that. So I see here a question. While Shahidi is normalized and celebrated in our circles, in this moment of overt state violence in the US, Sikhs do not seem to be engaged or actively involved in the struggle as a community. What do you think is the root of this cognitive dissonance? Rumpalveer, did you want to start off with that?
Well, I don't know if I'm in a place to say that Sikhs are not actively involved in the struggle. You know, I think individually, yes. Institutionally, I don't know. I don't know what sort of goes on behind the scenes, or you know, even if I'm not seeing it on social media, that's not to say that the wheels are not turning for more long-term improvement. So I'm hesitant to say that we're not involved in the struggle. But I will say that there is the, you know, when in the context of Shahidi, I think I often see it in the community, whereas there is this separation between our 18th century Shaheeds and what we're seeing today. In fact, there's a difference between what we're seeing with 18th century Shaheeds in 1984. People are much more comfortable talking about Banda Singh Bahadur and talking about Sukha Singh Mehtab Singh than they are talking about, you know, Baba Jarnail Singh and Bhai Sukha Bhai Jinda. You know, so I think we still need to solve that problem to figure out, you know, our understanding of Shahidi and how it applies today. But I do think that, you know, re-examining, as we've discussed today, re-examining what a Shahid is and what those qualities are, and recognizing the roots of that, like we said, that connection to Barney, that letting go of that Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar, letting go of all those things, and realizing that we can follow those same steps to live that lifestyle. I think if we sort of demystify that, we may have we can relate to a lot of the Shahids in different ways, from the 18th century to the 80s till now. So I think that is a little bit of the reflection that needs to take place for us to really get to the root of it.
I hear you, and I agree with that decision, but I think it brings up something in my own mind. When Indira Gandhi declared emergency, for example, in 1975, and took away basic civil liberties from people in India, it was Sikhs en masse who protest, including Baba Kartar Singh, who led a protest of 100,000 people in Punjab. And recently, the anti-Muslim legislation led by the Modi government, we saw instances, brief little small sparks of Sikhs here and there that were involved, but that sort of mass movement of the community coming together in a huge way. I mean, I just imagine if there's a Black Lives Matter protest and you have like a Nagakirtan size a group of Sikhs joining, how powerful that would be, how powerful that would look. And I'm wondering, and I don't know if this is an answerable question, either of you please jump in, how do we get that spirit back? We had it not too long ago in our community, that sort of mass getting out there for democracy, for human rights that we used to have.
I mean, I'll just say, I
think that. Go ahead.
So, Japmankor, go ahead.
Okay. I think that for me, at least, I refrain from doing too much like call to action if I don't see myself, standing up to it as well. But at least a reflection on my own life. Like, I feel like I'm too comfortable. Like, I'm too comfortable in all of the things that I've been blessed with, and sometimes it doesn't push me enough to see that what my purpose in this life was. And that, I've been sharing these things that I feel like I've learned from like history and Guru Sahib about giving our head. But until we actually like understand that concept that this life isn't ours and it's for Sarbat Pala, it's for making sure there's justice in the world, we're going to be disconnected with that purpose. And again, like going back to the poem by Fauja Singh wrote, he says, "Awaz andarli bahar suna denge." We're cultivating it on the inside to a degree. In Nagar Kirtans and joining in Sangat and all these things, it's important, right? But if we're not able to take that Sikhi that we are developing as a Sangat, as a Panth, and actually showcase it, and the only way to do it isn't actually to show the world who Sikhs are, it's to just be Sikhs and serve our purpose. And that comes with fighting against these oppressive systems. All throughout our history, every battle has been against oppressive systems. And I think in the past couple of years, at least my own reflection is, we've caught on to like feeling like victims maybe ourselves, or feeling like we have something to protect for our own Qawm and that we need a place in this world. So we don't form the right allyships. We tend to stand with the majority because it may even protect us. And I think that's where a huge flaw may be in how we're addressing these issues, because enough of us don't feel this strength that Guru Sahib has blessed us with, that this is our purpose. We're here to carry the Guru's mission forward. And, Gursikh once told me, we shouldn't just be involved in Khalsa, shouldn't just be involved in the Panth, but be Khalsa in our deeds. Like, everything about our lives should be Khalsa. So everything that we see in our history, through Arjan Dev Ji's time, Abdali's time, when the Sikhs freed those that were enslaved, all of those times reflect and show that our lives didn't matter. in that regard, where we were protecting ourselves. We were always there to stand by anyone whose humanity was oppressed, anyone whose rights were taken away. And we need to make sure we stand with the oppressed, or stand with anyone whose rights are threatened, because Guru Sahib has given us this freedom, this like a freedom that not many experience, and this it's clearly defined for us. I think we just sometimes don't see how to practice it in the world. But the way to see that is to see how Sikhs in the past did it, and how Guru Sahib themselves did it.
Thank you for that. I think that answers another question that just came up as well. And I'll just read through the questions so that the person who asked knows that we have looked at it. But I feel like it's already been answered. We've heard many stories of Sikhs who gave Shahidi for others, for other religions, races, or castes in the 17th and 18th century. But most contemporary Shahids were martyred protecting Sikh interests. Are there examples of Shahids for non-Sikh causes in recent times? If not, how do we reconcile this loss of quality with Gurmat? I don't know if it's entirely fair. I think something like the Anandpur Sahib resolution, for example, was really looking for systemic change around India. So those who were Shaheed in 1984 were not just getting Shaheed for the Sikh Panth, but also for the rights of people around India. But I understand that. I understand the point the person's trying to make, and I think what Japman Kaur said of developing that Sarbat Tapala mentality again in the Panth would really be able to change that narrative. I have an interesting question here, one that I've been asked before, in fact. And the person asks, do you feel that we are more focused on celebrating and symbolizing Shahidi as a concept, or celebrating Shahids, rather than committing to the action and effort to become one? So I think the person's trying to say, is the celebration of Shahids a detriment? Are we doing that too much, and is that stopping us from actually taking action? Do you have thoughts about that, Ruben Balbirji?
It is a thought that crosses my mind, and it's funny, just having the ability to work with Sikh youth, for example, over many years. I can see some trends and patterns, and I know that there's days that many years ago when we're doing an 84 discussion or a Shahidi discussion, or something along those lines. The crowds are packed, the wall-to-wall attendance. But then, in the same place, or a week later, we have a discussion on, Shabad Vichar. It's empty, right? So that's always sort of been in the back of my mind is are we putting too much focus on this? Or is it just easier to be able to discuss the Shahids? Is it more interesting? Is it more intriguing? Is it more inspiring? Whereas we're not able to, sort of gauge that same interest by in Vichar and Barney. So I think, yes, this problem does exist, where I do think we are very willing to, or very excited to kind of talk about the Shahidi aspect of it, but not the roots of what made them Shahids in the first place. And so that's where at least I've taken a different approach to how I present 84 and how I present teaching about the Shahids, and really try to teach it from starting with Barney, and really talking about, like we've said many times today, that connection between the two. It is that Barney that really connects all of our Shahids, because I think there is risk in trying to understand the lives of our Shahids, and frankly, all of 84 is very difficult to understand without understanding the Barney that has inspired it. So I think it absolutely, to get the full picture, needs to be two sides of the same coin.
Thank you. Let's move on to another question. We only have about 10-15 minutes left. This is an interesting question here. In evaluating or re-looking at Shahidi today, taking a true stance many times will mean that we will lose our family, friends, and social relations. These are hard sacrifices to make. Can Ruben and Japman Gorji share how to deal with that when you may have to stand alone? The standing alone against your own, without your family support or your social relations support. How can we make that stand? Hanji Japman Kaur?
I can't think of any other words but to think who cares, like at the root of it. But I know that it's much more complicated. But again, like looking back on history, like the story of Hakikat Rai, he was the Sikh of the Guru and he was about to change Shahidi, and his mom was like, don't say that you're a Sikh, right? Like, just like, you know, you're my son, and like, you don't need to like walk this path. And he told his mom, like, I'm not your son, like this is my purpose. And so it is actually like that hard stop is there for certain things. When we're on the Guru's path, we're the Guru's children first. Like we say, like Guru Gobind Singh Ji is our father, Mata Sahib Kaur is our mother. We've cut ties with everything else. I think that being caring of our relationships, it is important, but not at the cost of Gurmat and not at the cost of our Sikhi. So yes, it's hard, but that is the bravery that Shaheeds have. So if we're inspired by them and throughout history, we should be inspired by that same conviction they had when it came to those matters.
Thank you for that.
And sorry, another example that was coming to mind. Balbir Kaur, and during Jatoda Morcha, she had her son, and when her son was Shaheed, she just left him and kept going herself. Like that was like the level of conviction that those ties in this world, they don't actually at the end of the day matter as much as our dedication to the Guru's path. And I think that's something that we need to make sure that we're focusing on.
Thank you. Here's a question about whether we as a Panth have a victim mentality. And if we do, can moving from this allow us to share the pain of others and fight for all those that are oppressed, not just our own struggle with the Indian government, for example? Do you feel, Ruben Pavierdi, that we sometimes have a victim mentality? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it's a fair thing to say. And I think it really goes back to the narratives in which we are taught about Sikh history, and especially of recent events. And so I think I would agree with the person asking this question here, that because I do think it is a statement in a way that this victim mentality does limit what we see as our potential as being part of the solutions. And you know, I didn't feel that any of our Shaheeds that we have talked about today, you know, ever had that sort of mentality. So I think that you know, so I do think we need to move on beyond that mentality, and it starts with us, the storytellers, on how we're going to change that narrative. Because yeah, I believe it's going to be hard for us to advance and really live out the intention Guru Sahib had for us with that sort of mentality. Yeah,
I agree with you. That idea of Chardi Kala, that idea of Fateh in all things, the fact that Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji wrote Zafarnama after hearing about his children's Shahidi. So, you know, really, what type of victory is the Guru offering us, and what type of victory are we seeking instead? I have two related questions here. The first one is, and this may be a good place to end off as well. It brings us back to what's happening in America right now and in Canada as well. How to practice Sikhi while serving in government if the government goes against Sikh values? And the other question is, does Shahidi always mean that you have to be against state institutions? How do we engage with those who saw the killing of Officer Taliwal as him being a Shaheed, but can't find the need for Sikhs to be vocal for the BLM movement or police abolition. So, A, how do we rectify that dichotomy if we're working for the government and the government is doing things that are anti-Sikh? And B, how do we interact with Sikhs who would rather make a martyr out of a police officer than stand with the protesters and those struggling for their rights? Well, I'll ask both of you to give your thoughts on this. Ruben Valverde, if you want to start off.
Yeah, this may not feel like a very clear answer because it's something I'm reflecting on a bit right now, but I'll share my thoughts. I find it hard for me to kind of tell people where they should and should not find work, because I do feel like it comes from a place of privilege for me to say, well, you shouldn't take this job or you shouldn't have that job. I just know for me, as I cultivate my relationship with my guru, that those decisions should become clear for me on what is appropriate for me and what is aligned with Gurmat and what is not. I do have a little discomfort saying what is right for other people. However, I do take issue, historically, to the question. I don't believe that a Shaheed is one who is only protesting the state, but historically, that's been the case, maybe 100% of the time. So we can't we can't sort of dismiss that. So while I do feel that if someone chooses to work for the military or someone chooses to work for a police force, hey, that's you. That's your choice, and that's your decision that you make in your connection with Gurmat. But I do take exception to when we compare the courage and the bravery, which I know those jobs do take courage and bravery and extreme sacrifice. But I am uncomfortable comparing that to the Khalsa and what we've seen historically. Because I believe that the principles in which they were fighting for, the stances in which they were taking are vastly different than what we're seeing with, not just in the US, but most police forces and most militaries. So I think that's something that I want to make sure is clear. I don't see it as the same thing at all.
Okay, thank you. Japman Kaur, your thoughts on this question?
Just a few. I agree with Ruby about being a little careful about how we're viewing people's choices. However, how we then use those people whose images are all over the media, who we try to draw inspiration from, that's important that we're critical of. So like if a Sikh is like losing their life, but it's for a cause that's not the Guru's cause, we can't label it as the same bravery as our Shaheeds. We have to be really critical of that. And it doesn't mean that they're, that sacrifice they made in that context isn't important, or, that they didn't lose their life, our family didn't lose someone from, that they love. But if it's not on the path of the Guru, then we need to make sure that we're framing it correctly in our community. And it goes back to the question that Arun Balvirji addressed earlier of how we're viewing and celebrating Shaheeds. Bravery in that context is one quality, like one of the qualities of a Shaheed. And we need to make sure we're looking at every single quality and what makes that Gursikh so unique and takes that Gursikh to that state where they are fighting for other people and that they are standing in solidarity. When we are feeling that we're a Akal Purkh ki Fauj, when we truly accept that, we won't be able to tolerate any creation of Akal Purkh is being, terrorized or is facing anything that is against their rights and taking away their rights. So, and we need to make sure that we understand that the Guru in all of this is perfect. When we feel lost, something in our lives, whether it's our own, Jameed, I don't know how to say that in English right now, or whether it's our Sangat, that people holding us accountable are pushing us back to the Guru. Because, like, Kabir Sacha Satgur Kya Kare Jo Sikha Main Chook. Like, we have faults, and we may frame our narratives incorrectly, but we need to make sure that the Guru's path is always, not misrepresented. And honestly, like, who are we to really even fix that? Guru Sahib is like eternal. When we think about it, like the same Bani that our gurus were reciting and the Gursikhs at that time were reading is the same that we're reading now, and it's the same that everyone will be reading generations from now. It's eternal. So we need to make sure that that's what we're connected to. And Bani teaches us that we need to make sure we are standing with those who are oppressed. And I really like that image you brought up, because it's something I was speaking about at home earlier this week, is why aren't we at the forefronts of these protests? Jinne jora shora na assi apne Gurpurb manone and everything like that. Something to think about, something to reflect on. If it makes us uncomfortable, that's good, because that means that we can then try to take steps to correct what we've done incorrectly. Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Shahidi is always highlighted as just Hind ki Chadar, but it's beyond that. What was happening at that point, what he stood up against, it's something that we need to really reflect on in today's time. His Shahidi and his life at that point was to carry forward the mission of the Guru of Sarbat Tapala. And there's this Punjabi kahavat, a poem, Jad Dolda Khoon Shahidan da Takdeer Badaldi Qaumaਂ di, that the takdeer of our Qaum, if we want to be a part of this legacy, then we need to make sure that if we do lay down our life, it's for that cause. And when we highlight people in our community, we make sure that it is for that cause of the Panth. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much. That was a beautiful place to end off. I wanted to just, one thing I wanted to mention first of all is in Sri Gur Soba by Senapati's autobiography of Guru, biography of Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji, he calls Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Srishti Ka Chadar, the Chadar of creation. And I think that's a much more beautiful way of describing Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji. I wanted to end off with two things. First of all, of course, to thank the guests, Japman Kaur and Ruben Pal Singh, for taking time out and for your thoughtful, heartfelt answers. The ideas that you brought forward about love being the center of Shahidi, about following Hukam being the center of Shahidi, about reclaiming that idea of Sarbat Tapala, all of those ideas were really powerful, and I want to thank you both for that. I have here two quotes of Baifoja Singh's poem that I wanted to just say before we end off on our last Shabad. And the quote's in English, I don't have the Punjabi here, but he says, "O true Guru, we will serve your everlasting Sikhi with every word, thought, and deed. We will devote our youth, our wealth, and all our possessions to the cause of the Khalsa Panth." So those are the words of a Shaheed who gave a Shahidi in the last 40 years in Punjab. And that's the type of mentality that a true Shaheed has. I want to end off with a small Shabad of Bhai Gurdas Ji's that talks about the nature of a warrior. Vakte uppar lad mare, amrit vele sabad alape, ਸਾਧ ਸੰਗਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਇ ਕੇ ਹਉਮੈ ਮਾਰ ਮਰੇ ਆਪ ਆਪੇ ਲੜ ਮਰਨਾ ਤੇ ਸਤੀ ਹੋਣ ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਪੰਥ ਪੂਰਨ ਪ੍ਰਤਾਪੇ ਸੱਚ ਸਿਦਕ ਸੱਚ ਪੀਰ ਪਛਾਪੇ. Bhai Gurdas Ji is telling us that the true warrior fights in the hour of need. When they are needed, they fight, and they connect with Nam in the immortal hour in Amrit Vela. The true warrior comes to the Sangat of the divine and destroys their desires and egos. The perfect path of the Gurmukh is to die in battle with complete control of one's senses. And in that moment, the person you keep your faith in is a true guru. So those are the words of Bhai Gurdas Ji, a really high level he's putting up there of what a true Shahid should behave like, how they should interact. And I think that's something that we can all aspire to in our lives and be inspired by the great Shahids of our past, and keeping in mind the Shahids of 1984, especially today, who gave their life for the sovereignty of Akal Takht Sahib and the Darbar Sahib complex. Thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for this beautiful, deep, rich conversation. I'm always so thankful that I get to sit in on all of these and engage in this perpetual learning, as I like to think of it as. But on behalf of Sikhi, I thank Japman Kaur, Ruben Bal Singh, and Sant Bir Singh for making time to connect with the Sikh world today. And I thank all of you. Thank you to our e-Sangats for tuning in today and for spending this time with us. Please tune in for our next live webinar on Children's Day on June 14th, as we welcome all these various beautiful guests, some who will be joined by their children, to engage with Shabad, Sakhi, storytelling, poetry, art, music, and much more. These various activities will help children learn about Sikhi in new and creative ways, prompting lots of questions and space for self-discovery. And lastly, don't forget to tune into the Sikhcast, a podcast produced by Sikhi, where we explore the various issues and events affecting Sikhs worldwide. Thank you for joining in today. Today's webinar will be ending now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.